Well, hello everyone. Welcome to DES 113. This is our typography class. I am excited to be teaching this week because we have a very fun week in terms of assignments. You're going to get to create a typography portrait. And what I love about this is you're going to be able to use the characters within the font family that you choose, and you get to create a piece of art. So this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to grade it, and I'm excited to demo it and to teach it. But happy Memorial Day to everyone out there, and I'm thankful for those who are joining me either remotely through the recording or whether you're in class in our live lecture. So I'll go ahead and stop this video, and we'll go ahead and move forward. We're going to go ahead and talk about some business first, some class business. I sent out an email over the week, and you know what? I'm going to see if I'm sharing the proper screen here. There we go. There's the slides. So we'll talk about a little bit of last week. We're going to talk about this week and what's coming up. Now, in terms of how challenging did you think week 2 was? You didn't have 8 logos to design, but you did have a grand opening flyer, and that did pose some challenges to some who may not be familiar with design and layout and the proper way of creating balance on the page. But I thought a lot of you did an excellent job, and I was very pleased with what I saw. And I gave you lots of feedback. Please check the comments section in your assignments, because I would repost your PDF with my comments in little speech bubbles so that you can see what I'm talking about, where you need to make corrections. I sent out an email also, hoping everybody received it last week. And the email was about just how to get a better grade. Okay, so I'm offering an assignment 1 and 2 resubmission opportunity. I don't do this every time, and I don't do this every mod, but I feel like it's beneficial to the student, or to you especially, to help you grow in not only in improving on your work, but also help you grow with your skills. No one gets it right the first time around anyways. And if you're a designer, you'll know you'll go through several drafts before you even come to your final draft, and that you're pleased with it. So I wanted to let you know that I'm going to be offering the class the opportunity to resubmit your assignment 1, the logo design, and assignment 2, the grand opening flyer. Just those 2 assignments for a better grade. So there are a few rules to follow though before it is regraded, and I wanted to emphasize this because a lot of students skip these steps and assume that they're just going to get their assignment regraded. And so so there's only 3 things that you have to do. The first thing is you must visit the Student Success Center before resubmitting your assignment. Or you can visit my multi-session on Wednesday to pass it off. So the idea here is you take the feedback that I gave you, and you take it to somebody to look over it with you. So you make the changes, and then you review it with someone. So they need to look over your final draft, and you need to make the corrections that they may suggest, the corrections I gave you, and then the Student Success Center will email me after you visit, so I'll know that you went to attend. So there's no getting around that. I'll know who went and who didn't based off of the Student Success Center contacting me. But if you come to my multi-session on Wednesday, we can go over the comments if you'd like, if you want more feedback, or if you're not sure why you got docked some points. But check the rubric, the grading rubric. If you did get docked some points, the explanation is in the rubric. And then I gave you further explanation in the PDF that I uploaded under the comments section. Okay, no resubmissions will be accepted if you do not do this first and most important step. The reason being, a lot of students will kind of glance over the feedback, not always executing all of the comments that were given. So this kind of helps you stay on top of making sure you get everything corrected. Because I don't regrade half or partial assignments, so that's the main reason. The other one is I think it's important for you to know where the Student Success Center is, and important for you to attend multi-sessions, because you get that one-on-one attention. I'll be able to give you some live feedback. You can make corrections then and there and receive a grade on the spot. So there's some benefits to coming to the multi-session. Number 2, I want you to make the corrections that I gave you in the grading feedback, and all of my critiques were given in the rubric, and like I said, under that PDF that I attached in the comment section. If you don't see it or you didn't get it, please email me right away, because everyone received it. Even if you got a perfect score, you received some kind of comment from me. And then number 3, all resubmissions need to be uploaded before this Saturday, June 3rd. That's the end of week 3. I will not be taking resubmissions for week 4 or during week 4. I've got enough to grade with the final assignments and late work for week 3. So I need to have everything in by this Saturday, same time, 11:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And after that, no resubmissions will be accepted beyond that deadline. So please be aware there are 3 steps to getting your assignment regraded. Now, I really do hope this helps some of you who may have struggled on the first assignment or the second week, but I'm a big believer in resubmissions, because I feel like they help you learn from your mistakes and help you improve on your design skills. I mean, I'm a seasoned graphic designer, and I still have to do things over and over and get critiques on my work. So I wish you guys luck, and I really hope that you take advantage of this really amazing opportunity. Not all instructors offer this, and I don't always offer it every mod. So if you need extra assistance, or you want to review the critiques that I gave you, please come visit the multi-session on Wednesday. It's not a lecture, it's just open office hours, basically. So it's your opportunity to get some one-on-one attention and help from me. And you're welcome to visit any other multi-session as well. But that being said, those are the those are the requirements. So let me know how I can help you, or if you did not receive any feedback for your assignment. Okay, so let's jump into what we're going to expect this week. We're not going to spend too much time going over it, because it's pretty self-explanatory, and I will go over it in the demos. The demos will be pretty quick this time around, but we'll talk about assignment 3, which is your typography portrait, okay? Now, the typography or typeface illustration is what we're calling it. The grading rubric is up, but you basically are going to choose a font from the font list that you created during week 1. Now, they haven't quite corrected this. There was a list of specific fonts that you needed to choose from. I'm not going to be too picky, but I do want you to create an illustration of a face using only letter form, so only the characters in your font family, okay? And I'll show you how to do this, and I'll demo it. But I want you to consider the personality of the font, and I want you to try to capture that in the character of the person that you're going to be designing. I need it to be it to be kind of apparent whether it's a man or a woman. Is it old or young? This kind of has to be communicated through your design. And then what kind of personality and attitude would be descriptive of the font you chose? So taking those things in consideration, I want you to create this typeface illustration. Now, we only need the face or the portrait, basically neck up. We don't need anything beyond that. So just be aware. There are specifications. This is done in Illustrator. And then your page size and all of the specs are under the assignment. Black and white only, no grayscale, please. And then just kind of pay attention to what you need to submit. You only need to submit a PDF. It does ask that you save an Illustrator file just in case you need to make changes to it, but later, and there might be some changes after I give you some feedback, but otherwise the PDF is sufficient to submit. All right, are there any questions? All right. Let's move towards assessment 3. So assessment 3 is the typesetting body copy. And this is going to give you an opportunity to practice your typesetting skills by setting the text from last week's research paper. And what you're going to do is lay it out in a 2 or 3 column InDesign document. So assignment 3 is done in Illustrator, but this assessment 3, the typesetting, is done in InDesign. And we're going to use the 19 rules of typography to choose an appropriate typeface. You will be graded on all 19 rules. I posted a link in the announcements last week of what those rules were. We're going to be going over them in detail this week. But basically, we're going to be choosing, I want you to choose a proper alignment, paragraph breaks, and everything we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks, you'll be graded on this. You're going to need to use paragraph and character styles as well, okay? So that is that. We're going to jump right into lecture, and I do have a video I want to show you. We're going to be talking about the designer's main goals here. And before I get into this, I'm going to see if I can pull up the video to share with you. All right, here we go.
Hi. One of the most important things I've been reiterating here and there in the videos is the idea of creating and working with readable text treatments. And here I'd like to show you a PDF of several different ones, some of which work better than others, and they work in ways that you might not be used to seeing. So we're going to take a look at some of these different approaches here. This PDF uses some clever gibberish text, which is generated from, there are several websites you can go to plug in keywords, and it will randomly generate gibberish sentences. So it's kind of fun to look at. But here, it's been used just for the type treatments. The first one is done in an Old English, old style typeface. Now, generally speaking, this is considered somewhat illegible because it's so decorative and it's so heavy and condensed. However, the treatment here is not that bad. You'll notice that it is great contrast, black on white. The line length is a little bit long. I would have made it shorter, but you'll notice that it has some decent leading. So this is actually something that is readable. So if you ever had to use this typeface, knowing that spacing around the letters is of prime importance, as is a short line length and a good contrast. The next couple paragraphs use sans serif and serif, respectively, for the same treatment. And it looks like they're the same size. And you can see the differences in the two serif and sans serif. And the sans serif one looks a little larger. So I would say for better readability, the type size on this one could go down, but I would keep the same leading. And as with all of these, I think the line lengths are a tad too long, and I would make them shorter just for better readability. But generally speaking, these two are pretty good for readability. The next couple are not. The bold, the all caps, not as easily read. The bold gets dark. It has a dark text color, as we say. It's not bad in some ways because it's upper and lower case. It's got decent leading, but we try to avoid that in body copy. Bold is just too much. All caps, you can hopefully immediately see that this is tough to read. All the letters are the same height. It just makes it tough, and the long line length doesn't add to this. So we do avoid bold and all caps in paragraph text. The next sections are what we call reversed text, any text that is lighter than its background. Now, this can be a very effective treatment for headlines, for subheads, for really short passages, but even for something this long, no, it's too much. It makes the eyes tired after a while. And here, in this example, which uses the font Papyrus, you'll notice that the ascenders and descenders are starting to bump into one another, which says that the leading is not deep enough, and this would need to be reset. And some designers feel, by the way, that the font Papyrus is so overused that it's a good one to avoid anyway. This next one is quite good. It's a light green background with black text, and I think generally that is a readable type treatment. Here we have the same green background, but not so readable. The bold here, the thin typeface here, notice that it's set in gray, very difficult to read. And this one is horrible. Not only is it all caps and bold, it's a condensed typeface that is practically completely illegible. So we want to avoid the decorative fonts treatment on paragraphs. And here's another example. A really cool looking digital font, very modern, but not in this treatment. Really tough to read. Okay? Now here's an interesting example. This is a very small point size, and it's kind of hard to read on the left, but the same size type is a lot easier to read on the right because of the leading. The leading has been probably tripled in depth, and it's really still quite small, but you'd agree, I think, that it would be a lot easier to read this on the right. So if you ever have to use small point size on your text, make the leading as deep as possible for ease of reading. Next, we have an example of how text that's overly large is really tough to read, as you can quickly see. It's tiring. Here are some great examples of what not to do. Gray text on a light green background, really tough. And then my personal favorite, the busy background. You can't read that text at all. It is just impossible. Here's one solution, and that is to take the same background and ghost it back, make it a lot lighter, and then the text is much more contrasty on top of that. Lastly, I went over these in another video, but we'll repeat them here again. This is the same paragraph set in different alignments. This is flush left, and this is justified. Each of these two top ones are really quite readable and work quite well in layouts. If you work with the word spacing on the justified so you don't get the holes in the text, you can be quite successful with these two settings. Flush right, which is here, and centered don't work as well for body copy. The rags are just too distracting. So you want to avoid those two settings for long passages. This is something to be aware of if you use text wrap here, where you wrap text around a graphic. You should really use a justified type alignment when you're wrapping text around something, because you'll get a straight line on the edges and you'll get a much cleaner line around your...
So we're going to stop there. And let's see if I can pause the video. There we go. Okay. So hopefully that gave you some insight into text readability. So that's what we're going to jump into today. So when you hear the word legibility or readability, there are a few things I want you to think about. Legibility. Is the type large enough and distinct enough that the reader can discriminate among individual words and letters? So like she talked about in the video, there were some fonts that were legible and some that were not. When it comes to readability, ask yourself, does the quality of the page make it easy to read? Is it inviting? Is it pleasurable to the eye? So there's a few things to keep in mind with that. All right, let's jump into the 19 rules of typography. I've mentioned this before. You will be required to know these, and you will be graded on these in the assignment to see how well you implement them. But there are 19. We're going to kind of blow through them a little bit. I'm just going to cover the basics so that we're basically familiar with what they are. So the rule number 1 is using a classic typeface. What does this mean? Well, we just talked about legibility. For optimum legibility, choose a classical time-tested typeface. Why classic? Well, time-tested means if it's been used or if it's been around forever, chances are people... it's a good font to use if it's been used over and over. I showed you a video trailer of the Helvetica font, and Helvetica is one of those classic typefaces that's just very easy to read. It's a sans serif font that's been very clean, but has been used by several companies, as we saw, and they were able to craft and customize and use those characters to exhibit a very legible proportion. So this is important. So using a classic typeface, don't be tempted or lured in by those fancy fonts or maybe those decorative fonts I like to call. There's a font that is often used, very Western-like. It's all good and can be legible, but when it comes to classic typeface and designing with them, you're definitely going to get optimum legibility if you stick with the tried and true. Some examples when you're choosing what to write on for your paper, or maybe what to choose for your portrait. Choose maybe Baskerville, Bembo, Bodoni, Caslon, Franklin Gothic, Frutiger, Futura, Garamond, Helvetica, News Gothic, Times New Roman, of course, is a classic. There's Palatino, Saban, Universe. There's lots of choices here. So that's just a basic list. Okay, look at these two examples for just a minute. Rule number 2 talks about maximizing 2 types of typefaces. I might have made a comment in your grand opening invitation to use a maximum of 2 colors, or perhaps a maximum of 2 fonts. And here's why. The example on the top is an example of too many different typefaces at one time. Be mindful not to do this. The main reason for using more than one typeface, the reason why I say only use two, is to create emphasis, or maybe to separate one part of the text from another, like a headline from the body text. But when too many different typefaces are being used, the reader is really unable to determine what is and what's not important. It all just looks jumbled. So be mindful not to use too many different typefaces at one time. That's the rule. All right, rule number 3, use typefaces that are different in form. What you want to do is basically avoid combining typefaces that are too similar in appearance. So if you use a serif for a headline and then serif for your body copy, it doesn't create enough contrast to create visual interest. So you want to avoid combining typefaces that are too similar in appearance. So if the reason for combining typefaces is to create emphasis, it is important to avoid the ambiguity caused by combining types that are too similar in appearance. So, example on the top. What's wrong with this example? Right, Abraham Lincoln quotes, so the headline is a serif font, and then right below it is also a serif font, right? So there's no contrast, real typographic contrast here. The example on the bottom, though, there is a serif body copy, but a sans serif headline. This creates not only visual interest, but it creates a separation of elements. So this allows there to be that emphasis that we need. All right, let's talk about number 4. What do you see? What's the difference in number 4 in terms of legibility? All right, so basically the rule says use upper and lowercase letters, but don't use them in large bodies of text. So text set in all capital letters severely retards the reading. Have you ever received a text message that was in all caps? 1, it's hard to read. 2, you think they're shouting at you. And 3, the message is lost. The tone is lost. So use upper and lowercase letters for optimum readability. There's a time and a place. You can use them for a headline, and that's okay. But for body text, you really want to make sure that you're sticking to lowercase, okay? Ascender and descenders provide the necessary visual cues to kind of help guide your eyes along each line of text and make the lines of text more readable. Text is set entirely in uppercase letters. They form very monotonous rectangular shapes that really hinder the eye's ability to read across clearly and easily. So just remember that uppercase letters can successfully be used in display type, like headlines or maybe type above 16 points, but body copy and any large blocks of text really need to be done in lowercase. So just remember, this can severely retard reading if you use all caps inappropriately. And it's kind of a given because we've all experienced reading something in all caps. It's just very hard. Right, let's look at rule number 5. You want to use an average point size for text type. Why is this a rule? Well, for text type, you want to use sizes that, according to legibility studies, prove the most readable. So for text type, you want to use sizes that generally range from about 8 to 12 points for text that is read from an average distance of 12 to 14 inches. So that's about the distance between you and your screen. But be sure to remember that sizes based on the X height of the letters, they really appear different from one typeface to another. And as we can see in this example, anything below 5.5 points is just illegible. It's not very easily read. It's too small, and you have to really strain to make out what it's saying. Anything above 8-point font, I think, might be, I always felt like 8-point font was a good size for a body text. 8-point is about what they use in magazine layouts, maybe 8.5, but they generally don't go much larger than that. You can go up to 12 points for text that's read if you need to fill space, but overall, this bottom example is generally the happy medium where you want to be. Okay, let's talk about rule number 6. So you want to avoid using too many different type sizes and weights at the same time. Use minimum type sizes and weights. Why is this important? Because some experts recommend using no more than 2 sizes. So the rule of 2s seems to be coming up a lot. No more than 2 colors, no more than 2 fonts, no more than 2 sizes for display titles, and 1 for text type. So as you can see in the example above, they're using too many type sizes and bolding and regular, and there's just too much going on. Whereas the one on the bottom is a little bit more appropriate because they're simply trying to stay consistent with what they do. Everything is a regular weight size, and everything is about the same size when they're trying to pull emphasis. So, okay, rule number 7, you want to use text types of book weight. You want to avoid typefaces appearing too heavy or too light. That's basically why. Using text types of book weight, this can basically help the legibility a lot more. If you bold everything, then nothing is emphasized. If you use something too light, it can't easily be distinguished from the background. It's really hard to see, especially if you have a busy background. And in typefaces that are too heavy, counterforms really diminish in size, so this makes them a lot less legible. So this is a good rule of thumb to remember. It's okay to bold occasionally to highlight something, but don't do all the text all in one block. Don't do a block of text in bold or light. All right, let's talk about rule number 8. Use typefaces with medium width. Okay, what does this mean? Now we're talking about the width of your text, the width of your characters. Use typefaces of medium width. You want to avoid typefaces that appear extremely wide or too narrow in width. So we might have seen some fonts that naturally do this, but this also, the example above looks like the font was squished a little bit, that it wasn't properly resized by constraining proportions. So use the typefaces of medium width. You want to avoid typefaces that appear too wide or too narrow. So rather than distorting text by stretching or squeezing, what I recommend is that you just choose condensed or extended font types that fall within an acceptable proportional norm. So there are condensed versions or narrow versions of your font, like Arial's Black Narrow, or let's see, there's extended versions as well. So those are acceptable, but doing it yourself is not so acceptable. Rule number 9. So for text type, you want to use consistent letter and word spacing to produce an even, uninterrupted texture. I noticed this when I was grading the grand opening flyer, how some of the right alignment wasn't being used. In this case, letters should really flow gracefully and naturally. The spacing between each word should be even. There shouldn't be these big gaps or these uneven gaps especially. So this means that word spacing should increase proportionately as letter spacing increases. So the example on the bottom one is a left justified alignment, which is what I encourage you to use throughout your designing if you can. It's the natural way the eye reads, and also it gets optimum legibility because there are even amount of spaces between each word and each letter, as opposed to the one on the top where it's kind of random and uneven. All right, so rule number 10, you want to use appropriate line lengths. Lines that are too short or maybe too long disrupt the reading process. So you want to make sure that you don't chop off unnecessarily. You don't put line breaks where they don't naturally fall. A good rule of thumb is usually there's a default in InDesign that you can just use, but a good rule of thumb is that a line break can come after a comma, but
I wouldn't recommend doing it before that. And try to be aware that your lines are kind of all the same size. So when working with text type, a maximum of about 70 characters, which is about 10 to 12 words per line, is thought to be the most acceptable. So you don't want to chop off or cut off paragraphs or put line breaks where they don't appropriately naturally fall. All right, we're checking through this. More than halfway done. So on rule 11, you want to use line spacing that's readable. Basically, for text type, using line spacing that easily carries the eye from one line to the next is the idea here. The one on the top, can you tell me why this one doesn't read so well? The one on the top has the leading is too tight, meaning the lines of text are too close together. So the descenders are running into the ascenders, and this causes poor legibility. The example on the bottom has just the right amount of space between each line. So the leading is increased slightly, but that gives an even amount of space between each line, therefore helping the readability, and it also improves it. So by adding 1 to 4 points of space between lines of type, depending on the specific typeface, of course, readability can really be improved. So just kind of keep that as a rule of thumb. Based on what the size of your font is, the leading should be about 3 points different. So if you have a font size of 8, then I wouldn't go any more than 12 points for your leading. So that's the general default and the general rule of thumb for that. So keep that in mind, that if you ever hear me say increase the leading or tighten up your leading, that means that it's either too far apart, the lines of text are too spread out, or maybe too tight. So you kind of have to find a good balance. Okay, rule number 12. We kind of went over this earlier on one of the earlier rules. I think it was rule number 10, but rule number 12 says for optimum readability, you need to use a flush left, ragged right type alignment. Okay, what does that mean? Lots of big words in there. Left, basically you left a line, but you see how the example on the left it has a ragged left where the words start at different places. It doesn't all start at the same place. Kind of just like the right side. It's not quite centered, but it's not quite justified either. So what we need to do is use proper line spacing, whereas the example on the bottom has a justified flush left where the words start at the same place, and a ragged right where the words don't end in the same place. We read from left to right anyways, so our eye really naturally wants the words to fall in line. So just kind of imagine there's a horizontal ruler line, or I'm sorry, a vertical ruler line that you are using, and this is why it's important. So by adding 1 to 4 points of space between lines of type, just depending on the readability, your leading can be improved, but just by lining it properly, doing a flush left, this is also very important. So just remember, optimum readability can be accomplished by using a flush left, ragged right type alignment. Okay, rule number 13. We're chugging through these. Strive for consistent rhythmic rags. Okay, what does that mean? The purpose of effective rags is not only to achieve aesthetic beauty, but you really want to enable readers to move gently and effortlessly. When the eye is going across the line, you really want it to move down to the next column naturally. Effective rags consist of lines establishing in kind of an informal but consistent pattern of line endings. Whereas the example on the top here, again, there's really abrupt paragraph returns that don't end naturally. And so the one on the right is a little bit better, although we want to turn off the hyphenation. That's the only complaint I have on this example, is that the hyphenation is there. There's a way to turn that off, and I can show you. But you really want to strive for effective rags and not unnatural ones. Okay, rule 14, you really want to clearly indicate paragraphs, but you need to be careful not to upset the integrity and the visual consistency of the text. This happens often. The two most common ways of indicating paragraphs are by either indenting and inserting kind of an additional space between the paragraphs. You never do both. So if you're laying out your article, you'll either want to indent the first line of your paragraph to show, hey, this is a new paragraph, or you don't indent and then you just add a return and then you start the next paragraph. So I would say pick one or the other. Lots of students kind of forget this rule and they do both, and it's not the proper way of laying it out, and it's not visually, it doesn't flow very well. It looks very choppy and inconsistent. So we really want to make sure that we observe this rule. Okay, rule 15, you want to avoid widows and orphans whenever possible. We've gone over this the last 2 weeks. If you're not sure what a widow or an orphan is, please go back and review it. But basically, to remember, a widow is a word or a very short line at either the beginning or the end of a paragraph, okay, that kind of just hanging there. And then the orphan is just one single syllable at the end of a paragraph. So if it's anything that's just kind of left off, then that's considered a widow or an orphan. Now, if you look at this top example, can you tell me what is left? What is it, a widow or an orphan? So in this case, it would be a widow. It's a very short word. Paragraph is the only word. It's so lonely on this line here. And so we would normally want to just have it end on the same line as the sentence. We'd either extend the text box to fix this or tighten up the tracking a little bit to adjust. So if you can see the one on the bottom here, this is much better because now it's not so lonely. All right, so referring to Rule 16, we want to emphasize elements within the text with discretion and without disturbing the flow of reading. So can you tell me what you see? Why is the one on the top a bad example? Or why is it an example of what not to do? So you can use italics, underlined type, color type, different typefaces. You can use small capitals, capital letters, bold type. Within light type, there's lots of different variations you can do, but use minimum means for maximum results, meaning don't use every effect in the book all at once. Again, it kind of goes to that rule of twos. Just kind of pick one or two and stick with it. So in this case, the one on the bottom isn't using anything different. It's just kind of keeping everything consistent. All right, here is a major rule. This is Rule 17, but you never want to distort the type, okay? What does it mean to distort type? If you preserve the proportions of the type, you're always maintaining the integrity of the type. So avoid arbitrarily stretching letters or skewing them. Well-designed typefaces exhibit visual qualities that can really make them readable. So when you're in InDesign or Illustrator and you're not sure how to resize a text box correctly, you can sometimes get distorted type or your type is misproportioned. The way that you can avoid that is by holding down Shift and Alt Option as you click and drag the corners of your text boxes to enlarge or to decrease. The same with shapes. You can do the same thing with shapes. You can easily distort them if you don't hold down the proper keys when you're resizing them. All right, we're down to our last two. So rule number 18, always align letters and words on the baseline. You will have me give you this comment quite a lot in the feedback for this next upcoming assignment because this is what I'm going to be grading specifically on. Do your lines line up, or your columns of text line up on the same baseline? Well, look at the example on the top here, and then look at the example on the bottom. What is different here? Just tell them to be quiet. All right, so always align letters. Letters are designed to coexist side by side on what we consider an invisible baseline. And in week 1, I showed you what a baseline was. It's that invisible line that all the characters line up naturally on. English is not Chinese. Look at this sentence. So English is not Chinese. If you look, these letters, now this is a very extreme example, but they don't line up on the same baseline. Whereas the example on the bottom, it lies flush with the baseline and is easily read, right? Same thing with columns. You'll want your columns to all line up, same lines of text. We don't want any staggered lines of text. We want that baseline to extend to both columns and not just to one. Okay, so you'll be graded quite heavily on that, and I'll show you how to make sure you're doing it right. Okay, so rule 19, last rule, but when you're working with type and color, I want you to ensure that sufficient contrast exists between the type and its background. Now, we went over this a little bit last week, but I saw some of you kind of break this rule. Now, you used dark backgrounds, and then you put a dark text on the background, and it was really hard to read. In fact, it was poor legibility, poor readability, or there'd be a really light background, and then you'd use a really light color for the font, and it was very hard to read again. So this is what this rule is saying. The best contrast between the type and the background is anywhere between, I would say, 80 and 90%. Anything beyond that starts to fade, and it's a little too hard to read. So just make sure that you have a strong contrast between your font color and your background color. And that's basically all it's saying. So be careful when you're using photos or texture behind text, because this can also hinder the readability as well. Okay, well, we kind of went through that very quickly. That's good. We'll kind of skip through this. Okay, so here are a few other, we went over the do's, now we're gonna go over the don'ts, okay? Bolded body text. Please don't use the bold font style for the entire paragraph of text or for large bodies of text. Bold should only be used sparingly, and it should only be used to create emphasis. It's just far too heavy to carry the eye through each line of text. All caps, don't use all caps for body text. Like I said, we talked about this on one of the rules. It's very hard to read. If you've ever received a text in all caps, that's hard to read. Anything online that's in all caps, it's hard to read. So just make sure that you're using lowercase or sentence case for that. The next one is scripted fonts. I've said this over and over, especially with logo designs. Just avoid scripted fonts. I know it's tempting. It's a fancy font. When you're designing for an Italian restaurant, you just tend to gravitate towards that kind of a font. But believe me, more can be done if you use a simple, classic, time-tested font. And so what I want you to try to challenge yourself to do is avoid scripted fonts using all caps especially. So just try to avoid them both. Vertically stacked text. This is also very hard to read. I might have mentioned this in your logo designs as you tried to stack letters vertically. This is a big no-no. It's just hard to read, and I've never seen a logo design that stacks on top of each other. Side by side is quite appropriate, and that should be what you aim for. There's also rule body text is too large over 12 points. So I'll be grading on this as well. For your assessment 3, when you lay out your article, you really need to make sure that your body text is between 8 and 12 points, okay? Anything beyond 12 points, you're going to get deducted points. So just be aware of that. Anything beyond 12 points now becomes a subheader or even a headline or a title. So you've kind of moved on to a different category altogether. Another big one that I see happen quite a bit is outlined body text. Outline text to begin with is just a very amateurish move. Just avoid it. There's no need to add a stroke to your text. If you can't read it and you need that stroke, then you need to change the color of the font or the color of the background. Okay, so just don't ever use outlined body text or drop shadowed body text. Too many effects used on the text like blurring, shading, blends, bevels, shadows, gradients, all of these things just really hinder the readability of the text. So just
I would just say avoid all of these altogether. There's really no appropriate place or time to use them in body text especially. Okay, try to avoid the first line indent, making it too large. It's okay to do a first line indent if you're going to do separating your paragraphs, but if it's too dramatic, it almost looks like it was accidental, and it also kind of it's an abrupt start to the article. It's not visually pleasing at all. So just make sure that the first line indent is just an appropriate 1 or 2. I'd probably say no more than 0.125. That's what 1/8 of an inch. So I'd probably not do anything beyond that. Inconsistent spacing after paragraphs is also a big no-no. You just want consistency. Creates unity, and it creates like an overall aesthetically pleasing look. And so we really want to maintain consistency in size, in weight, in spacing, our line spacing, our letter spacing, especially after paragraphs. And so that's what this is saying. You also want to make sure that text too close to the edge of the page or box is avoided. I've mentioned this to 1 or 2 of you, but if you get your text too close to the page, if you don't give yourself enough breathing room, and I should emphasize an even amount of breathing room on all sides of the page, then you stand the chance of things getting cut off when you send to print, or things not even getting cut off when you convert to PDF. So make sure that you give yourself enough room. Text too close to other items or text boxes, graphics, pictures, or even other text columns of text. This can cause a problem, makes it look too cluttered. In fact, sometimes they run into each other and the readability is lost. So make sure that text is, I should say, and then also the fact that text is unreadable over the background. Again, we talked about that last rule. Just make sure that your background and your text aren't competing for attention, that the background isn't too dark and the font's not too dark all at the same time. So if you're just the rule of opposites, if you're going to use a light background, use a dark text. If you're going to use a dark background, use a light text. It just is a good rule of thumb to abide by. Okay, do we have any questions at this time? We kind of blew through the rules. And now we're going to talk about proofreading our article, proofreading our layouts, using proper punctuation. And this goes for headlines too. Sometimes we think that if we're going to use a large headline that we don't need to add any punctuation to it, and that's simply not the case. So let's look at what happens when we forget or fail to use punctuation. Let's look at this line, "Let's eat grandma." How does that read to you? But if you add a comma, a simple form of punctuation, "Let's eat grandma," then that definitely changes not only the meaning of the sentence, but it also changes the flow of it. So this is important to use punctuation. This is when your type knowledge will show or not. Punctuation and special characters. Use appropriate marks. I'm going to show you how to use glyphs, and I'll show you how to use glyphs in InDesign, but use glyphs when available. Use appropriate marks if you need it. Practice sensitive typography. Depending on the language, there's specific characters and accents that you'll need to use, like Spanish or French. There's glyphs already built into your software, and each font family has glyphs. So depending on what you're designing in, you'll need to use this. You won't need this for the next upcoming assignments, but it is nice to know that the glyphs exist. I didn't even know about glyphs until I was well into my design career. No one showed me this, and so I feel like I lost out. I should have known. So glyphs are very important, and it's important to know where to find them. And I can show you that in InDesign in just a little bit when we do our demo. All right. Let's see where we are in time. Okay, so just 10 more minutes and then we'll be good. Let's talk about the upcoming assignments. Okay, I mentioned this last week, but using effects responsibly is very important. But above all, there are 3 deadly weapons of design that I think really hurt your
layouts. One is stroked fonts. Simply don't use them. Anything with an outline or a stroke is not necessary. If you have to do that, it usually means that the font color or the font itself is not legible enough, and so it will most likely need to be changed. So I would change that before adding a stroke. Drop shadows are another way. There's a time and a place for a drop shadow, definitely not for body text, and you definitely need to know how to tighten the drop shadow before applying it. So I say stay away from it altogether. Usually it's not used correctly anyways. And then gradients as well. Some students kind of think they want to include the rainbow in their gradient, and it really winds up looking dated. And so gradients, if used tastefully, are appropriate. I don't mind gradients, especially for backgrounds. I think it adds some dimension to the design, but not for the fonts. So I would just avoid that altogether for your font, especially body copy. All right, and then using effects responsibly. So I won't get into how you do these because I don't really want you to apply them for these assignments, but here are some steps that you could follow. Take a screenshot of it if you'd like, and it goes over how to do a drop shadow. And then this one, how to do a gradient. You do want to take time to get it right. Color choices, I say maximum of 3, but you want to stay close to the colors on the color wheel. The closer on the color wheel, the better your gradient will flow. Whoops. Let's see, where are we at? Then again, stroke fonts. Is there even a purpose for the stroke? Is it the right look? And usually it's not. So I say, please avoid it or take time to get it right. Okay, do we have time for this? We might not use this because it won't be necessary. We'll come back to this if we have time. Okay, so let's look at designer responsibility here. You do have some sort of responsibility when it comes to your designs, and even with the text included in your designs, whether you wrote it or not. What can happen if you don't pay attention to detail? And I show you this because I really want you to pay attention to your designs. Let's look at this example of failing to do a simple spell check, or maybe they ran spell check, but because it's spelled correctly, it never picked it up. 15 things about our public schools. Because the reader didn't read through this properly, it got printed, and now serious error. Now, will point out that in this case, spell check wouldn't have picked this up because it was spelled correctly, but you will need to proofread your work, especially the large content, I think. And then let's look at this example. Packed with taste less sugar. Is there any punctuation here? We just talked about punctuation. Because there's no commas, it just kind of reads as a run-on sentence and is a little confusing. We kind of get what they're saying, but it doesn't read or flow. So remember, use punctuation properly, especially with your headlines. Because that's what's usually seen right away. All right, what about this one? What did they fail to do here? Yeah, this is supposed to be a kids' exchange clothing store, but because there is no proper spacing between the words, it reads a little differently. It's a sad error. But again, it just really goes to show that these rules, these 19 rules of typography, if not applied, can really change the meaning or the message or even the legibility of some of these projects. Okay, some of you Harry Potter fans out there who may have all the volumes or all the movies. Next time you look into your media cabinet, take a look at your DVDs or your stack of DVDs. Have you noticed this before? What do you notice when they're stacked on top of each other? I noticed a gross error right away. It's the inconsistency of the layouts, down to the placement of the headline. I mean, some of these aren't even placed anywhere close, or one of them's missing a picture. So everything doesn't quite line up correctly, does it? Down to the Warner Brothers logo or the picture or even the headline. So it's styled differently, it's laid out differently. Clearly they weren't using a template, or just were not very consistent overall. And so this is what it looks like when you're looking at an article that's not properly laid out. You just have that inconsistency glaring at you. It's pretty obvious. All right, let's look at this one. Does this one make sense? Take a good look at it. Yeah, first floor. Basically what happened here is they too ran spell check, but they didn't proofread it. This should be first, second, third, fourth floor. It looks like a bad copy and paste job was going on here, but because they didn't proofread this or check it before, there's a poor error on their part. So it doesn't make any sense. Clearly the message is completely lost. All right, and then in terms of logic, can you make out this acronym, or can you figure out what they're doing? They're trying to do an acronym, or I guess whatever those are called, the I for information, but they don't do anything for the next four letters, and then the N, but it doesn't even start with, the department doesn't even start with an N. So again, this is a vertical stacking. Avoid it, and it's also just illogical. It just doesn't make sense. The eye process can't really process it. So just remember, do everything on purpose. When you're designing, have a purpose. If you're going to stack, is it creating an image of something? Is it creating an illusion or an illustration? Does it help the readability? If it doesn't, then just avoid it altogether. All right. This one is actually a common, happens quite a bit. This Orange County Magazine laid out a cover, placed their model on the cover, and failed to look where they placed it. This is Where magazine, but unfortunately her head is covering up a portion of that E, and so it reads differently. And it's just all about positioning here, people. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to our designs, paying attention to placement, that everything is done on purpose. All right, here's another one. This designer thought they'd get creative, and in place of the G, they used a piece of grapefruit to spell grapefruit. But however, it reads differently. It just didn't translate. So this is a good idea gone wrong. This is an example of, maybe if I leave off a letter and use an image instead, maybe it'll kind of add to the design. And in fact, it really hurt the design of it. This designer got in big trouble. So just kind of make sure that you're executing your ideas correctly. All right, so that is that. Let's talk about our text illustrations. Here are a few examples from students before who have turned in their typeface illustrations. And it always helps me before tackling an assignment to kind of see what's been done before by other students, kind of help get those creative juices flowing. There is several of these examples out there, really intricate designs out there, but we're not going to get into the fancier typographic illustrations. That'd be more for an advanced class, and more effects can be achieved in Photoshop than Illustrator. So, but I wanted to show you that this is basically what I'll be looking for. We need to be able to tell if it's a man or a woman. I need to tell if they're old or young, and I need to be able to tell clearly what it is. So just make sure that you kind of put some thought into this. It can be very simple or complex. Though we're not going to be doing anything engineering or with buildings, I just wanted to show you that there are a lot of typographic examples out there on Google Images. Styles and sizes can create texture and value to your image. Look at this building, this picture on the right. This creates depth based on the size and the weight of the font characters. And then the heaviness of the characters in the front of the building really make it look like it's popping off the page. So this is pretty cool example. Though we're not doing buildings, we are doing face and portraits. This is an example that using bold and regular and light, you can get lots of different effects. Now, I talked about using Photoshop for getting these effects. The one on the left is used in Photoshop. You'll find that it's easier to achieve this kind of a look if you are using Photoshop. But this one on the right was created in Illustrator, and this one's a really cool, intricate one. This would take a lot of time, but this is a good example of a typographic portrait or a typeface illustration. So styles and sizes can also create texture and value. So you want to make sure you're using bold and regular, and like look at that C as the earring on the ear. It really stands out because it's bold and the large size. It creates emphasis and texture. All those characters used on the ear are a lot lighter in weight. All right, we're not going to get into this today, so we don't have time. Are there any questions before we jump into our design? We're actually going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to jump into our design portion of the lecture. We'll talk about our assignments. I'll do a little demo, and then I'll show you how to upload and save your files. So we'll go ahead and take our 10-minute break right now, and we'll come back.
Okay, so we are going to jump into our demo portion of the video. I'll go ahead and close out of the PowerPoints. And let's start with the portrait assignment. I think this one is so much fun. And then we'll get into how to lay out the assessment. Let me close this out. You know what? Let's do it vice versa. So let's do the assessment first, then the portrait, because I failed to load my Illustrator, so it's going to take a little while. So we'll just pull up the one that I've got going on right here. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what's going to be expected for your assessment. There are a few elements that you're going to need to know. First of all, you're going to need an 8.5 by 11. You will need a 2 or 3 column grid for your InDesign document, and I'll show you how to set that up. Follow with me. We'll go to File, New, click on Document, just like you do to set up any normal document. And then when the dialog box pops up, there's a few things you're going to want to do. Number of pages, we only need 1. And then if you have this box checked, Preview at the bottom, you'll see the changes being made in live time, so you can see what's being done. Deselect facing pages. What this means is there'll be pages side by side. You don't need this. So just deselect it. And then letters, standard letter is fine. We want this to be orientation is portrait. And then right here where it says columns is where you'll enter the number of columns. Now 2 or 3 is the suggested amount. I wouldn't go any more. Obviously you can't do any less. So this is what a 2-column grid looks like. If you notice how that popped up, look at the screen again. That's a 2-column grid. This is a 3-column grid, 4-column, 5-column. So you can see how it changes the look and the appearance of the document. 2-column grid would be just fine for this assignment. There's 3-column grids, so we'll stick with 2. This will be a good amount to balance and practice with, and then you'll just hit OK. And that's all there is to this particular setup for the document. And then I wanted to show you this here. Okay, so here's an example of a magazine article and the basic elements that usually are in an article. You've got your running head, your credits, your headline. I'm only going to circle the elements that really you're going to be required to know, to have on here. First things first is the headline. And let me see if I can give this a color so you can see. So first thing we want to do is the headline, okay? The next thing that you're going to be graded on is this byline right here. Oops. There's the byline. And then maybe a subheader that follows. And then obviously your body copy right here. And for this assignment, this is just a basic layout. This is what you're going to be required to have on here. So these elements. I will encourage you to use a drop cap, which is this larger kind of intro to the paragraph. And I'll show you how to do this. But other than that, I think that's all that you'll need. So really, that's what, 4 or 5 elements on this page for this assignment. Now, what this is supposed to do is kind of help jumpstart you into assignment 4 to get you comfortable with laying out type of body copy and kind of typesetting your elements on your page. You won't need to worry about the rest of these elements. Once we get into week 4, we'll go over it for your final project. But these are just the basic things. So headline, which is the title of your page, the byline, which should be very small and below your headline, the sub-headline, which follows, it's usually called the intro or the kicker in the magazine industry. And this one follows the headline, kind of gives a summary of what the article's about. It's usually in a larger font than your body copy. And then you've got your body copy, which are your columns of text. And then you've got your drop cap, which is basically the first letter of the article that is usually set to be larger to kind of show the eye or the reader where to begin the article. Okay, so with that quick rundown, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about headlines. So we'll go to our, let me go here, take this off. Okay, so first and most important textual element on a page is the headline. Now what you have are these really cool gutter lines that separate your columns of text. You don't want any text to fall within these, in between these purple lines. This gives you the proper amount of breathing room or white space between your elements. And you want to make sure that your text boxes line up. If you grab your type tool, you want to make sure that your text boxes line up perfectly and imperfectly within that column, okay? You never want to see it overlap like that, especially overlapping in the center. You don't want that at all. Okay, so we want it smack dab in the middle. But when it comes to headlines, like I said, it's the first and most important textual element on a page. And so the headline is as important as the layout, if you ask me. After the reader opens the page, the first thing that catches their attention is usually the layout or something, some dominant image. But the second thing that's going to draw their attention and lure them into reading the article is the headline. If you are a magazine reader or have a magazine on your desk now, I encourage you to look through it and kind of pay attention to the styling, the layout of these pages, and look at the catchy headlines. The reader may find layout attractive, but if the headline is not appealing or interesting, it's not going to draw them in, and people will skip the article altogether. I do it all the time. I'm flipping through a magazine. If it's not interesting to me, I'm not going to stop and bother reading. So headlines can vary in size, and the importance of the article really determines the headline size. And in this case, we are writing a very important paper about our font, and so we're going to make a very large headline. And I would like your headline box to extend from one end of your margin line to the other. Okay, so one end of the purple line to the other. You can position it up here. And I'm going to do all caps for mine. You don't have to. Let's see if I can fit this. Maybe I won't do headlines. Headlines are big, okay? That's my title. There we go. Next thing that we want to do is we want to kind of pay attention to the positioning. Usually headlines are almost always at the top. Sometimes in magazine design, they might be within one column. But if you're going to do that, you're probably going to want to shrink the size. This is another way you can do it. Like that, within a headline. I don't recommend doing that though for this assignment, just because we want to get in the practice of having a very large headline. So we're going to keep this one nice and big. Okay. This is the place where the eye is going to go first. That's why we put it at the top. So many times I've seen the headlines placed at the bottom, and for me this is really bad design. Not always, but I guess I should say not always, but it really rarely works. I would stick with placing it at the top and give the headline importance that it deserves. It should be the first thing that people see, first thing that your instructor sees, so put it at the top. The headline should be set in the bigger size regarding other text elements. Remember, it's got to be like 4 times bigger than the rest of the other elements on your page. So when I say I want the headline big, I do want it to extend from one end of the page to the other. All right, the next thing that we're going to focus on is the byline. It's just that small little caption underneath the headline that's a lot smaller. And this is where you tell the reader who wrote it. So it's either by Mrs. Woodland, or yeah, we'll just do that. And I like creating contrast in my article. So I'm going to change the headline, the big headline, to Helvetica. Let's do a Helvetica bold. And I may need to shrink my font size for this. There we go. Headlines are big. And then for a contrast, I'm going to do, well, I'll keep this also Helvetica, but my body copy I will do in a serif font. Now, the reason why I'm going to use a serif font is because serif fonts are actually, they do help the reader read large bodies of text easily. It helps the eye flow from one word to the other. Those little serifs, so those tick marks at the end of the font, really help guide the eye. And it's encouraged to use a serif font, whether you're building a resume or if you're writing a cover letter, just because it's easier on the eye to naturally read serif font. So we're going to do everything else in a sans serif font. I'm going to use a regular to add contrast to my headline. And if you'll notice, my byline is only 12-point font. And it doesn't even need to be that big. I would even go so far as to say just make it 10-point font. It's going to be lined up right underneath my H. Nice and even. All right, so that's what it should look like. Look in terms of size, the difference in size. Bylines are extremely small. This is a 10-point size. Headline is about 65, so don't be afraid to make that headline big. All right, let's see if there's anything else that we need to know about this. Nope. Okay, so let's move on to the intro. It's also called the kicker or the stand first or the deck. You might have heard it as the subheader. But as you can see, there's many names for this type of element. So I prefer to call it intro because I feel like it's pretty explanatory of what it is. Although the most used name is kicker if you're in the magazine industry, but I call it intro because this is an introduction to the article. That's simply what it is. It can be the first paragraph, your opening paragraph of your paper that you wrote. And keep in mind, this is, you're designing and laying out your paper. So use the first sentence, or you can summarize it. So in this case, I'm going to position it between the first column, and I'm going to just simply fill it with some placeholder text for the time being. Now the intro doesn't need to be very long, just a few lines long. It can be anywhere from 2 to maybe 5 or 6 lines of text, and that's appropriate. In this case, I'm going to make sure nope, not that large. I'm going to do about 13-point font on this, maybe even 12-point font on the subheader. The idea here is to make it a little larger and a little bit different than your body text. And my body text is going to be 8-point font. So 12 and 8 are quite different. And I'm even going to bold this. It's just a small block of text. All right, so I've got my intro. Now notice the break between these elements. Okay. There's a good amount of space between my byline and my subheader because they are different. They're different elements on the page, so we want to make sure that they're different. And notice my alignment. If you'll look up here, it is left justified, ragged right. So it's a flush left justify with a ragged right alignment. This is great for the eyes and great for reading, especially large bodies of text. Now, from the design point of view, your intro should be set in a bigger type size than the body copy. So like I said, this one's done in 12-point. Your body copy should probably be around 8-point. But definitely in a much, much smaller size than the headline. So look at the proportions here. You can also make it in a different type style. So if you set a headline in a serif type, you can use sans serif type for the intro. I just happen to do it the opposite. So I have a sans serif headline and a serif introduction. This isn't a rule set in stone, but sometimes when you design large articles, the headline can stand all by itself on the page, working as a team with the image. But this treatment of headline and the main image is also strong, and will get explained later. But if you decide to do this kind of design in your intro text, it really should stand on top of the body copy, acting as a real introduction to the article. And that's when you get into like the heavy laying out and designing for magazines. But in this case, this is all that you'll need to
to know. So there's my, I'm gonna add some punctuation at the end of that. There we go. Okay, so that so far is the intro. Next we have the body copy. And this is where it gets just a little bit tricky because we really want to make sure that we're focusing on proper column alignment. You want that box to line up just right. You have your smart guides on, they'll snap into place, but you want it to line up with that margin line. So again, you're going to place your text into your column. This is, one thing I failed to show you was after you draw your text box, you click this corner button here. Let me zoom in. I'll undo that so you can see this bigger anchor point here. If you click on that, you'll notice how my mouse changed into a white mouse, and it almost looks like there's some text that's yet to show. I'm basically connecting my text boxes. So what I'm going to do is draw two text boxes. They're the same size, and look at that. My smart guides helps me snap into place by clicking my first text box, hovering over this anchor point, clicking it. Now you can see it changed. It's almost got that triangle in the middle like a play button. And I'm going to go to the next one and I'm going to click on it. This connects these two columns. So no matter what text I flow into the first, whatever is left over will flow into the second. So I don't have to draw separate text boxes to place my text. So I'm just going to simply go to File, Fill with Placeholder Text, and look at that. Now it fills in both columns of text. Now in your case, you're going to be placing the copy from your Word document, and that's a pretty easy thing to do. What you'll do is once you've connected your text boxes and got them laid out, you'll go to File, let's see, File, Place, we'll see if it pulls anything up. I don't think I have a text box anywhere. Well, while it's doing some thinking, you'll just go to File, Place, and you'll place your Word document in it. And so that's how you'll load it into, okay, it's doing a lot of thinking. I don't want it to think that long. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay. So File, Place, find your Word document and then hit Open and it will flow it in. All right. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and format this text. Now, if you're going to have the subheader in the first column, then you'll want your column of text to extend all the way to the top here. And you'll want even amount. I'm going to check, I'm going to make sure this is on 8-point font. I'm going to need more text to fill it in. This is where meeting your word count for the last research paper is going to come into play. If you had a much shorter article, you're going to have to go find more content and flow it in. But here, as you can tell, I've got a 12-point font on my subhead or my intro, and I've got an 8-point font on my body copy. I'm going to take the first letter, zoom in really closely here, the first letter of my opening paragraph, and I'm going to create what's called a drop cap. And that can be found right here on my InDesign document, or you can go to Window and go to, I believe it's Paragraph, so type in Tables and click on Paragraph. And under this paragraph box, you can kind of hover over each one, but drop cap number of lines. So that's just saying how big do you want this letter to extend. You do 1 line, 2 lines, or 3 lines. 2 to 3 is appropriate. So we'll just stick with that. I've got my drop cap. Once you zoom out, you can tell it's not that large after all. And I think let's see, try to get this to line up. There we go. Okay, and that's all we need. Now we'll need to format our paragraphs. So remember, the rule of thumb was you can either indent, whoops, I don't want to indent that much. You can either indent your paragraph, or you can hit a return. And in this case, I'm just going to do a return, but I don't want to do a drop cap for each. You're not supposed to do a drop cap for each one. So I'm just going to hit enter. Just kind of format my paragraphs just like that. Okay. And if you'll notice, I'll pull down this ruler, this top ruler bar. And as I lay it out, the bottom of my words, you can see across each column that they line up on the same baseline. You see that teal ruler bar there? That is the same baseline. So the words line up across both columns on the same baseline. I'm going to be looking for that. I want them to end, I want your columns to end at the same place. I don't want anything that looks like this, where you have a big open portion at the bottom here. I don't want that to be the case, okay? So either fill it in with more content or shorten up the columns. Okay, now you can either do this kind of a layout, or you can make the columns the same size and extend the subheader across the page. That's also another option. Okay, so this is kind of a basic way to lay out your assessment. I'm trying to see if it needs to be in black and white. Okay, it doesn't specify, so I think we can add some color here. I'm just going to add a pop of color to the headline. The largest element on the page should deserve a little bit more, attention. I'm going to also give this drop cap some color so we can see how it grabs the attention. I might make it a little bigger so it really stands out. You can even go so far as to change the color of the subheader, but I like the contrast here. Just little subtle hints of color are just fine. All right, next thing you'll need to know is how to set up a paragraph style and what a paragraph style is as opposed to what a character style is. And I'm going to get into this. So let's talk a little bit about what character styles are and what paragraph styles are. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, you can access your paragraph styles and your character styles by going to Window, drop down, and then type in Tables, or I'm sorry, go to Styles. You can click on Character Styles or Paragraph Styles. Now I already have my paragraph styles box up, so I'm going to bring up my character styles. Basically, a character style is a collection of character formatting attributes that can be applied to text in one single step. So instead of manually seeing me do this, I just did it manually. But if I wanted to format this, I would go to my character style. You can click New, give it a name by double-clicking on it. I can title this Headline or Headlines. And then you can go into your basic character formats. I want it to be Helvetica, bold. Let's see, character color. I think I'm going to give it red. And that's going to be my character color. Anything else that you want to add to this character, then hit OK. Now this is kind of in my library for formatting. So say I wanted to create another headline on a different page. Another headline here. If I clicked on my headlines under my character style, look how it automatically formatted that for me. Okay. So that's the benefit of having a character style. It saves you time and steps. A paragraph style is similar. It includes both character and paragraph formatting attributes, and it can be applied to a paragraph or a range of paragraphs. So where the character styles come in handy is if you're doing an article and you want to save yourself time. So for each headline, you don't have to go and change the font to Helvetica. You don't have to go change it to red and change it to size 72. So everything is already preset for you. So they're just presets basically. And character styles are very helpful that way. If you make a change on something that you've applied this style to, it will automatically go and change. You'll notice that when you make a change to it, there'll be a plus sign on the right of it, and that means that you went in and changed it. So if you're wondering why it's not doing what you want it to, it's probably because you made a change since you applied that style. Now, paragraph styles are a little trickier. You'll add a paragraph style. These are great for large bodies of text, like the body text. Okay, and then this is where you can give it basic, let's see, I want this to be the case. So paragraph style right here. See, it's now taking my headline. So basic character formats, I want it to be 8-point font. I want this to be Minion Pro. Whoops, not done yet. I want it to be regular. And then that's all I need for this. Oops, I don't want it to be red, so that will have to get changed. Let's go to, because it has both, you kind of have to make sure you're staying on top of what changes you make to it. Okay, I want it to be black. There we go. Okay, so now that's all preset for me. So now if I wanted to change the subheader to my paragraph style 1, I just have to click it and it automatically formatted it for me. So that's the benefit of doing that. Just large bodies of text, it's easy to do. And in this case, this would be body text. Just labeling it also helps it. All right, so that's how you apply a basic paragraph and a basic character formatting attribute to whether a paragraph or a headline or a subheadline. You will need to have a paragraph style and a character style added to your InDesign document. You're going to be uploading your InDesign document in Assessment 3. I won't need your original native file for the portrait, but I will need it for this so I can double check whether or not you included it. So make sure you submit your InDesign file so you can get all the points. I won't be able to verify that you did this if I don't have the native file. All right, and then when you're done with this, you just simply go to File, Export, Small PDF, or low-res PDF, and then that's all, the smallest file size for the PDF, and that's all you need. So I believe, just go down the checklist of what you're going to need, but I think this is it. And this covers a lot of the rules of typography that we covered today. So just make sure everything looks orderly, everything sits on the same baseline, everything's aligned properly, and everything's lined up. Make sure your smart guides are turned on if you go to View, and then go to, let's see, Grids and Guides, and then make sure Smart Guides is checked, okay? Another thing you'll want to do is when you click, or if you highlight your text, let's do the subheader. If you'll notice on the ragged right side, there's words that are being hyphenated and wrapped around to the next line. I want to take that off. So I'm going to highlight this. And if you go to Window, Types and Tables, Paragraph, and pull up this paragraph box. If you deselect the hyphenate box at the bottom, it will keep your words intact and it won't break them up unnecessarily. And it will naturally wrap them around to the next line. So this is what I want you to set, even on your body text, have that set. Okay, you go to Window, Types and Tables, pull up your paragraph, and just check mark hyphenate. Okay. All right. So I think that's all you'll need to know for your Assessment 3. This is the typesetting body copy. Just make sure visual aesthetics, headlines, subheadings, these are all appropriate size and style. You could even add a little subheaders if you wanted to get fancy. Right here. And subheaders, again, are, this is where I would add my Helvetica. And I would do a bold. And this is where I would do a 12-point font. And I would make it red. They're usually a different color to stand out. So this kind of shows you where your new sections are going.
And you don't want a space after the subheader, you just want one before it. But this is a great way to break up your big, large bodies of text with some color and make it a little bit more visually appealing. Okay? All right, so that's all the time we have to spend on this, but I want you to kind of experiment and look at Google Images and kind of look at article layouts and see what elements catch your eye and what you want to include. But these are the basic things that we'll need to have. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit. Okay, so now I've got Illustrator up and we're going to go ahead and do our typeface illustration. This is a really fun assignment, so I hope you guys have fun with this one. I'm just going to show you a basic way to do it. Let me go pull up the requirements on this one and see if there's any specific dimensions. Let's see, specifications is an 8.5 by 11, so what we're going to need to do is create a new document. So if you go to File, New, this can be done in portrait or landscape. It's up to you. Just make sure it's a standard 8.5 by 11. One artboard is just enough. Hit OK. All right, there's our portrait. Okay, so I did some research, and if there's any Star Wars fans out there, there was a series of posters that were done in typography called The Force of Typography. This was the Star Wars edition. These were done for charity. There was an ad agency called H57 Creative Station, and it was a Milan-based advertising and design agency. And they created posters depicting Star Wars characters using only the type and the characters in the typography. This was really well received, and it was a poster series they did. And The Force of Typography blew up like the Death Star in popularity. This had fans clamoring for it. But the only problem was that the designer of these didn't have approval from Lucasfilm. So when they were producing this, they had to go to them and say, hey, can we print these? And they had to get special permission. Lucasfilm agreed to do a limited run of 300 posters, each design, but all the proceeds benefited the Italy Make-A-Wish Foundation, which I thought was really cool. So it was for charity, and they did get approval to do a few of these, but they just, I'm telling you, they just became really popular. The designer, and I'll show you a picture what I'm talking about. Let me see if I can drag this in. Here's one. This is Yoda. So cool, huh? Very simple concept, but yet it's just really effective. This project was born from a small home accident. This is the designer talking. He says, my cat Rommel was playing in the library and made my made my Darth Vader mask fall. When I picked it up, the mask was upside down, and I started examining all its elements. Looking at the upside down mouth, which is made in a shape of a pyramid with some slits, I realized that it formed a W. From that point, I had the idea to recreate Darth Vader's face using only typography. Here's this example right here. If you look at that, that's pretty cool. And this is just done out of the characters. Now, at the bottom here, it does tell you which characters were used. So several different fonts were utilized to create this look, but I'm going to show you how to do it with just one font family, because you're really only supposed to pick one typeface and use it. So we'll go from there. So I'll delete this one. Let's see if might be another one to show you. There's another one. This one's really cool. So again, they made a few of these, which I think this is Stormtrooper. So creative, so clever, so simple. You'll realize how simple it is when you start doing it. And we're going to do as a demo, I'm going to show you how to do Yoda. Now, if you find something out there that you really want to recreate, you can pull it into Illustrator, even if it's a picture of yourself. Just pull it into Illustrator and you can create a layer. So what I'm going to do is go to Window, Layers. So pull whatever you want to copy or trace, you can trace that as well, into layers, and then create a new layer. This first layer, if you label it, this will be the example layer. And if I'm going to change the opacity on it so it's really light. The idea of changing the opacity on this is so that I can trace over it and see my own work. So this is a nice light kind of template for me to trace. Now, if I lock it, if I click this lock here, it will now be immovable. I won't be able to click or drag or move it. And this is so helpful if you start designing in layers to not move elements off the page accidentally. But don't forget that you locked it, because some students are like, why can't I move my text box? And it's usually because they locked that layer. It's immovable. You can unlock it. You can go back and forth. This eye here toggles between visibility, so you can click on this eye and it will either disappear or show you it's there. But that layer will always be exist as long as you can see it. But this will hide the visibility. All right, so we'll keep that on. We'll move to layer 2. This will be my work. And I'm going to zoom in here really close to Yoda's face so I can kind of get the essence of Yoda. Okay, so I'm going to grab my type tool. If you click and drag, it looks like he used parentheses for the head. So I'm just going to go grab my parenthesis. I'm going to do one here. You go to Type, Create Outlines. It will now turn it into a vector so I can stretch it and manipulate it any way that I'm going to need. Holding down Shift and your Alt Option button will help you be able to resize it as well. I'm going to try to get this angle as best I can. And I'm using, let's see, what font is this? I think this is Helvetica. Let me check. And you really want to get that angle just right. Okay. If you hold down Alt Option and click and drag, it will copy it, or you can Command C, Command V. I'm going to get this angle just right. I want to line them up. Okay, perfect. You can even rotate them a little bit. You hover over the corner, it will help rotate your elements. Okay, next thing I'm looking for is a bracket, or not a bracket, I'm sorry, the greater than, less than characters. Go to Type, Create Outlines. Once you've created one, you only really need to just make a duplicate copy of it. So in this case, I'm going to make these nice and large for the ears. I'm going to rotate this, so kind of angle it. And this will require some skewing of your type. And in this case, it's okay because it's for artistic reasons, but I would not recommend doing that for your typesetting example. So I'm going to do my best to kind of gauge it. I'm not using the same font as they use, so it's going to be a little off, but you get the idea here. So I'm just going to copy it. Again, I'm going to rotate it. Kind of try to position it as best I can. All right, and then basically this is just using parentheses for the design, which is kind of handy. I'm going to create another parenthesis. Go to Object, or I'm sorry, Type, Create Outlines. And I'm going to create a nice fat parenthesis here. And these are going to be the cheekbones.
Make it a little thinner. And just copy and paste and rotate is how you'll achieve this. Okay, and we'll do another one for the eyebrows. I'll just kind of squish this one in. All right. And then I'll copy and paste it over to this one. This one has a slightly different angle, so I'm going to just go in and do that. You'll need to copy it again. This one's going to be a little smaller though, because it's going to be the eyes. And this one. Okay. All right. Next, we need to do the eyes. I'm going to use an O and go to type, create outlines. And I'm going to fit it right here. And copy and paste it over here. Next one I need is a D, capital D. I'll go to type, create outlines, and I'll rotate it. Holding down shift will help you lock it into the next 90 degrees. You can make it larger. So it's kind of cool how you can see it coming together when you start placing the elements. I love it. Okay, and then the next one, you can either do a line for the mouth or if you want to do it, capital I, type, create outlines. And since it is supposed to be typography only, we won't be using shapes or anything to achieve our look. I'll make sure I stick with the rules. There's his mouth, and then I'm just going to grab this eyebrow here. I'm going to rotate it, and this is going to become his chin. So I can kind of stretch it out. Kind of just the right angle on it. Okay, so that is Yoda. Now I will hide my example, zoom out, and you can see I created a lovely Yoda as my portrait. You can kind of highlight it, group it, resize it if that's easier for you. And then let's see, the assignments did say black and white only, no grayscale, only one typeface. And then you got to name the typeface that's displayed. So down here is where you'll put Yoda, and then I used Myriad Pro, regular. You can use different versions. You could use the bold, the italics. You can use different styles within the font family. But for this is all I'll need from you. So then you can just center it on the page and you're good to go. Now to upload this, now be aware that you need to save this Illustrator file. You need to save your native file so you have it to make edits if you need to. But you're only submitting the PDF to me. I only need the PDF. So File, if you go to Save As, Thinking, you'll give it a name, and then here at the bottom under Format, you'll want it to say PDF, and then you'll hit Save And then it will ask you, do you want to preserve Illustrator editing capabilities? If you want to say no, you do not need that. And then down here, you want smallest file size. We just want a small file size. So it's a quick upload for you and a quick download for me. Then hit Save PDF, and that's all that you need. You can add marks and bleeds if you want. That's not really necessary for this one. You will need it for your final project, so this is where you'll go. But other than that, this is all you'll need. So then you hit Save PDF. It will convert it into a PDF. Also, remember, if you are tracing an example, you can either delete that layer when you're done or hide it. Okay, because I only want to see your work displayed. Now, some students have gotten really creative and got so far as to trace their own portrait, do their own portrait, they take a picture of themselves and pull it into Illustrator or someone that they know. Some do famous characters. I'm clearly did Yoda. This is a fun way to do a simple typeface illustration. So I want you to have fun with this. I really do, and pick something that you're into, that I can kind of get a little bit of insight into who you are. So let's see. I think that's everything we'll need. If there are any questions, go ahead and email me. And remember, come to my multi-session on Wednesday. We're going to be going over, well, we won't be going over anything specific, but if you have questions or if you want to talk to me about, if you want to pass off your resubmissions for assignment 1 and 2, that'll also be open. I can look over your assignments, and I can always give you a grade on the spot. So come and make the most of the time. They are my office hours, so I'll be making phone calls in between, but I would love to help you. So if you're there, we'll work together. Thank you so much, and we will see you guys next week. Have fun on these assignments.